Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating, a highly structured, 5-step logical toolkit designed to help you deeply understand abstract concepts. We're diving into an approach called From Al-Quran to Al-Quran. What this does is outline a method of reasoning built entirely from within a sacred text, basically allowing the text to explain itself. This is a huge deal because it fundamentally changes how we interact with divine literature. Instead of just memorizing a list of rules, we're actually mastering a dynamic, living method of learning.
Okay, think about this for a second. When we approach complex, divine texts, do we just accept the end result? Or are we being taught a method of reasoning? Too often people view ancient texts merely as a list of dogmatic conclusions to blindly follow. But what if the text itself is actually a manual on how to think critically and logically?
This quote right here is a total paradigm shift. It tells us that the text doesn't just hand you the answers, it gives you the formula. Learning these underlying principles creates this brilliant self-sustaining cycle where we use the source to understand the source itself. By extracting the logical framework embedded right there in the text, we upgrade ourselves from passive readers into active, rigorous thinkers. To unpack this masterclass in reasoning, we're going to build a house of understanding following 5 distinct steps. First, the from the Quran to the Quran mindset. Second, the main foundation, which are the muhkamat verses. Third, building relevance and logic. Fourth, finding universal meaning across scales. And finally, the key to understanding, finding analogies.
Kicking things off with Step 1, From the Quran to the Quran, understanding through its own guidance. This sets the overarching mindset for the whole journey.
What's really great about this is that we're dealing with a finite, manageable system. It's a literal toolkit with 5 rules of application. Prepare muhkamat verses, establish relevance, trace logical consequences, look across scales, and find an analogy. You don't have to be a lifelong scholar to use this. It's a reliable engine for absolutely anyone to unpack profound truths. Moving right along to Step 2, the main foundation. Muhkamat verses. This is all about building a strong, unshakable base. If you try to build a house on shifting sand, it's going to collapse, right? Well, the exact same principle applies to understanding abstract ideas. You absolutely must start with solid ground. So, the crucial point here is that you always start by selecting the muhkamat verses. These are the clear, unambiguous foundational statements that directly fit your specific theme. Your entire framework relies on this base. If you want to study a specific topic, your very first job is to collect the most direct, straightforward texts on that subject. If your starting point is vague, your ultimate conclusion is going to be a disaster.
Now that our foundation is firmly set, we hit Step 3, building relevance and logic, where we really start gathering our perspectives.
Let's say we take fasting as an example theme. We're no longer just looking at isolated, clear statements. You gather all the muhkamat verses about fasting, but then you take it a step further. You ask, if this verse is true, what is the logical consequence of it? Tracing that logic connects your topic to entirely different parts of the text. You find the relevance to other verses, which actively widens your perspective and helps you form a much broader, highly precise understanding of the whole picture.
Which brings us to Step 4, universal meaning across scales. This is where things get incredibly profound as we search for universal meaning.
But hold on a second, because before we go exploring abstract universal truths that apply to all of human experience, we have to anchor ourselves to an absolute limit. And that limit is, do not violate your muhkamat verses. Whatever brilliant understanding you reach, it must never contradict your foundational verses. Honestly, no matter how enlightened or spiritually deep a new interpretation feels, if it breaks the clear, unambiguous rules we established back in Step 1, it is instantly invalid. Basically, your roof cannot be so heavy that it crushes your foundation.
And this leads us to a pretty powerful myth-busting moment. You often hear people say that a spiritual truth is simply ineffable or beyond words, but the source fiercely argues that this is frequently just an excuse. Look at the massive difference here. Side A says, do not express carelessly, which is totally valid. You're just guarding against public misunderstanding. But Side B claims, this is ineffable. The text warns that pretending a concept is too magical for human language is usually just a tactic to mask an incomplete understanding.
I absolutely love how incredibly direct the text is here. It says, just express it as far as it can be converted from abstract to realistic, or simply say, I do not understand enough yet. It challenges us to admit our own limitations instead of hiding behind false mysticism. Think about it. If the divine text was given to humans to be understood, then logically, it must be understandable. If you can't explain it, you just don't understand it yet. There is so much intellectual honesty in just saying, hey, I don't have the vocabulary for this right now, instead of blaming the truth for being too mysterious.
Finally, we arrive at step 5, the key to understanding, which is finding analogies. This is how we convert the abstract right into the realistic.
This is the ultimate tool for ordinary people to bring the highest, most complex ideas right down to earth. The entire goal of this reasoning framework is to arrive right here, finding the analogy or parable behind it. Finding that perfect analogy makes the abstract and ambiguous suddenly become clear, realistic, and highly relatable. If you can find just one rock-solid analogy that accurately represents the complex idea, while strictly making sure it doesn't violate those clear foundational verses, you win. You've successfully decoded the text. Analogies are quite literally the bridge between human limitation and universal truth.
So armed with this incredible 5-step logical toolkit, securing your clear foundation, tracing the logical consequences, ensuring you never violate the basics, and hunting for that perfect comparative parable, what abstract verse will you turn into a realistic analogy today? Thank you so much for exploring this brilliant framework with me. Take these tools, test your boundaries, and never stop seeking clarity.